Okay, now the tissues. To build organs that make us up, cells with similar functions need to aggregate together and form tissues. Epithelial tissue makes up structures that covers us, such as the skin, as well as linings of tubes like the gut or blood vessels, for example. What is the muscular tissue's main job? Contract. Actively, that's really all it does. It shortens. When we bump into something, our skin protects us. When we eat something, our gut absorbs nutrients we then use to get energy from. What other functions are mentioned in the epithelial that the epithelial tissue has? Secretion and sensation. Frustration, of course, that's what we get, but that's in the nervous system. That's a nervous system function. Frustration. Connection will be connective tissue. That's why connective tissue is called connective tissue. It connects things together. So far so good, huh? Mm-hmm. The reason why we don't bleed, our skin hits an object is because its top layers are dead cells that simply slough off without any blood vessels present. Cells in epithelial tissue continually regenerate. There is also no blood supply within it. Nourishment comes from the underlying connective tissue. Choose other characteristics of epithelial tissue other than avascularity. Yes, 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 yes. They're all there. So let's just look at the photograph here for a second. There we are at this point, huh? Epithelial tissue functions. We have protection is a function, like thicker skin. You don't bleed. It protects the underlying tissues. We want to absorb nutrients, and we want to secrete sweat, for example. And then we have some sensation with it, some sensory epithelium. And then the characteristics, it's very cellular. You see that here on the slide. You have one cell, one cell, one cell, one cell. There's not a lot of other stuff in there, like there. Here's a cell, and then there's a lot of stuff around. On the epithelial tissue, it's like cell, 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 cell. That's what that means. There's no extracellular matrix at all. And then a basement membrane, if you have cells, like let's see here is good. This is a multi-layered structure. All these dots are cells, and so you got many cells stuck on one of the other. You have a layer on top that's different than what's going on underneath. The top layer here needs to make sure, or the top surface needs to make sure it can slough off, and here it needs to make sure it. This is probably trachea, but if this is the gut, it needs to make sure we absorb stuff into it. And so that's why we have a base. This membrane here looks very different than this part here. So that's the basement membrane, the attachment to the underlying tissue, and the apical surface here, they call it, is the surface that faces into the skin, into the air, or into a lumen, into a gut tube, for example, or into a hollow organ on the inside. That's also epithelial tissue, like the bladder, for example, has epithelial tissue. Then we have no blood supply. Again, the good one to remember that is if you bump into something, you don't bleed, that means there's no blood vessels. If you don't bleed, no blood vessels. It's avascular. No blood means avascular. When you see the word vascular, that means vessels or blood. Wait a minute. No, vascular means the blood itself, I think. But A means without. Whenever you see the word A or the letter A in front of a word, you deny the word, basically. It means without blood. And it's very regenerative. And you again see that in the skin. You bump into it, you have a few layers fall off, they regenerate from bottom up. So a lot of growth going on with that. A lot of mitosis going on with that. That probably brings me to the next item here. Considering the epithelial tissue different tasks help us understand its different cell shapes. Thin, flat cells let substances easily penetrate, as is necessary, for example, when oxygen moves from the atmosphere into the bloodstream. That's where the alveoli work. We're going to have a chapter on that. But in chapter 1, we talked about alveoli briefly. What are cuboidal, cube-shaped cells good for? Which one? These one probably most likely, right? Diffusion is that skinny. If you look at cell shape, like diffusion, your cell shape for diffusion is like a flat cell, fried egg looking thing. Because there is no thickness to it, it can just go, the gas, oxygen can just go right through that. If a cell is thicker and all cube shape, you're going to have a long distance to get oxygen going through here. You have to transport that oxygen through, so you're not going to use it for oxygen. But for nutrients, we can use that, because we can bring those into the cells. And so, cuboid are great for secretion and then secretion, cubed on here. Secretion also, like the sweat cells, the glands, that's the secretion part. And often when you have a lumen like that, these cells, they're more cube-shaped than columnar. Each sweat gland has a tube coming out onto the surface of the skin, and then the sweat comes through that tube. That's one of those tubes. So that's usually a cuboidal cell, less than a columnar cell. And the columnar cells are good for absorption where there is more abrasiveness, like the gut, the food stuff. Has a lot of goblet cells in it, that's the slimy. When you see goblet cell, you're thinking mucus, you're thinking slimy stuff, protection. Like the stomach itself is very acidic. And so that alone, that can damage, so heartburn. If you know heartburn, you know what I mean. Come back a little bit, it burns. And so you can prevent that acidity from hurting the body by having goblet cells around that produce mucus that is alkaline. And so the first portion after the stomach in the gut tube, the duodenum, has on the beginning of the tube, that has a lot of these cells to make sure that the stomach content that's so acidic doesn't go and damage the gut after the stomach. I mean, if you put stomach acid on your skin, it burns through it. It's that strong. It's a pH of 2. That's very, very serious acid. Cell shapes can be single layer, called simple, which is good for material to pass through them. But then we can also have multiple layers, stratified layers. They call them stratified if they're multiple layers. What are they good for? Protection. Which kind of logically makes sense. You got a single layer, you take that away, you're not going to be protected. So it's going to be used for something else. Again, the why question is a very good question in this topic. Why would the body do that? And if you don't have a reason why, then you come talk to me or talk to other people. But there is always a reason. That's a structure dictates function question. So if you want protection, you're not going to just put one layer down. You're going to make multiple layers. Oh, here it is. Where is this? Multiple layers and stack them on top of one another. And the best example for there I have is the skin. And I don't treat this chapter like, this is a chapter where a lot of times you got the microscope up and you got all these slides up and you got to identify. Where's this from? But when I studied that, I didn't even know what a kidney was. And so why would I understand what the kidney slide? So I'm not doing that. Plus, as you could tell, it was not that easy to focus on a microscope for me, so I'm not the best at that. So you can learn that from some specialist who's good at that. But the school here has a very good microscopy program, if you don't know that, actually. That's something that might be interesting if you want a program that gets you some goodies so you can work in the biomedical field pretty quickly. That's something to talk about. Anyway, enough of that. Just proposing that stuff. Gut cells, for example, gut cells' job is to absorb nutrients. The top surface has finger-like projections that increase the surface area. The larger the surface area, the more nutrients can be absorbed. Does that make sense? Good. What are those extensions called? Microvilli. And in the gut, the cool thing there is also the microvilli have all these little, they call them brush border enzymes. They're hanging here. They're right there to be ready to digest the food particles to then get them through into the bloodstream. The other one we have is cilia. Cilia moves substances past. You know when you clear your throat, that's the cilia situation. They whip the mucus past themselves. And then you got the flagellum, and that's the the tail in the sperm, which basically moves the cell forward itself. That's what the flagellum's job is, to move cells forward. In humans, it's only the sperm. The rest don't need that. But I brought it there so it's just all completed. And then we also have junctions. And the skin's a good example to understand connections that form between the cells. Those are the junctions. Skin's pretty tough. When you pull on it, it doesn't just tear. Have you noticed that? See, we take that for granted. And then we're like, oh, now I got wrinkles. It's like, no, it never tore. It's just fine. So you can pull on it and it will not rip. This is because strong anchoring connections form between the cells. They're like really strong, holding tight together. What are those called? Desmosomes. Good. And that's right here when we have them and you see the connections, they really go through here. That's the desmosomes. Then the other ones are cool. The tight junction make it watertight, so that's easy to remember. So that's like buttons so the water doesn't go through. So you have to seal it. And then the other one, the last one I talk about is gap junctions. And those we find in the heart muscle. Because they are little gaps that can open and close, and they can let ions go through the heart muscles, and that's why the heart can contract in one unit and is not all flickering. And every cell does little contractions on their own. But that's not too fancy, right? You got that? Good. Some epithelial cells' task is to make substances that they export. Task is to make substances they export. Sweat. Oh, that's a sweat. Sweat actually is carried away heat from the body to cool it off. That makes sense? So you got the water has a high heat capacity, so it can absorb a lot of. It's good. It balances out temperature, so it can absorb a lot of heat without changing into steam. But then you can take that heat via sweat and put it out into the body and take the heat away from the body. So that's how that works. We call cell clusters. We call these exocrine glands because they secrete sweat to the outside of the body, exits the body. The other ones are the endocrine glands, and those secrete substances into the bloodstream. That's the difference. Endo is inside, exo is outside. Hello. Other substances such as hormones, for example, secrete. Oh, look at that. Is that true or false? True. I answered my own question. I should have read it beforehand. Epithelial tissue cells have also function as a gateway for the brain to experience the surrounding world. The nervous system works on electricity. Nerves are essentially cables with a lot of individual wires in them that have a start and a finish point. If you get poked, for example, the physical pressure on the skin is translated into an electrical signal. So what happens in there, we got these receptors, they look like onions. Some of them look like onions. They have layers and layers of cell membrane. And when you press some of those layers, they connect to one another. And when they connect, then they fire up a nerve impulse and transduce the pressure into electricity. That's just one example. Some of them are free nerve endings, like the pain, you cut yourself, you cut a nerve, it hurts. That's how that fires off. So that would be can be a pain one. They're free endings. So electrical signals blood that sends a message to poke to the brain. What other types of stimulus can you think of? Temperature, chemical, light. That's it. Yeah, comfort just comes with it. You can't get it on its own. Sensory. Good, and I think that will get us to connective. When we think of four tissues making up our body, muscle and nerve tissue have very specific functions. So muscles, the contracting, and the electricity stuff with information is the nervous system. Epithelial tissue can be understood by its function and characteristics. It is lined and covering mostly. Connective tissue is the most diverse one though. That's more difficult to understand. It's all over the body, it has many functions. It's recognizable by its common fundamental components. Because you've got bone is connective tissue and blood is connective tissue. And you wouldn't look like and go like, no, that's not going to do it. What's similar about those two? Well, the components are, we have cells and we have an extracellular matrix. What is the extracellular matrix composed of? Ground substance and fibers. Those are the two things. So in blood, the ground substance is water, liquid. In bone, it's calcium, it's like bricks. But we both then have cells that manage the whole thing. And we both have fibers that hold the stuff together. In the bone, it holds the calcium, so it's not just powder on the floor, so you have it all held together. And it gives it some flexibility. It's kind of nice. We'll talk about that, how it's arranged, in a minute, or a little bit. In the blood, the fibers are actually dissolved, and when we have a cut in a blood vessel, then they undissolve, and they become fibrous, and then they can help patch up the cut. So there's fibers there for that. All right, so we have those things. So let's see if we got the thing. Yeah, look at these pictures. They look like totally different. This and this looks totally different from one another. It's the same tissue type. Good. Then the next is probably connective tissue organization is largely done on different types of fiber. We know three main types. Collagen is most commonly found, a thread that cannot be pulled apart. It is non-distensible. So you want a tendon, you want to transmit force, you use that tissue, that fiber type down there in the Achilles tendon. We don't want to have one that bounces like a spring. That would be, that you couldn't walk that way. And by the way, if you actually want to strengthen and turn on the stem, whatever, the tendon repair and the tendon production, and then it's strong and healthy down there, you got to do jumping jacks or jump roping. Because when you load those tissues fairly heavily, they turn on the fibroblastic activity and all that and make it stronger. If you just do treadmill stuff where it's like 50% or so, or just sort of do cardio, it's not going to strengthen the tendon. So that's interesting. I was figuring that out about a year ago. I mean, I learned about it. So and then that growth factor stays on for a while. So they say, like, do jumping jack, do the jump roping twice a week or so, every 3-4 days for like 5 minutes or so. That really helps these tendinous things, because a lot of times those are structures that are things that give out when we do high sports or heavy sports and push our body really heavily. So to build up the stamina, that's a good piece of knowledge. What's the flexible kind called? The springy. What's the springy one? That one, huh? Elastic. And then we got the last one, and that's the reticular. And that's, you think that like it's a sieve structure, like you can filter things through that a little bit. So that's how they look. Again, a lot of those slides I want later on when you have another class and you have to look through microscopes. It may hopefully give you a little ideas. But if I go too much into all the details now, I think we're just falling asleep. At least I will. So I just made that executive decision not to do that. Cartilage is made of rubbery material. We find it where bones come together, making joints, a place of pressure and friction. Think of a knee. Besides, in a skeleton, cartilage is also useful to keep airways open. Is that true or false? True. That's true. So let's go back to this. Let me see. I jumped through a bunch of stuff. So we have different types of connective tissue. That's loose areolar. That's around organs. That's when you have you ever skinned a chicken? It's the shiny stuff. That's the shiny stuff, the reflecting. And then the dense fibers we talked about, that's the Achilles tendon. That makes sense that there's a lot of just force transduction that needs to happen. The adipose, that's our love handles. And then we got reticular, that's like a lymph node. That's where you have a lot of reticular fibers. When you see that? Yeah, this stuff actually works quite well with association. A lot of words give you a lot of meanings. And anatomy and physio, I study that best when I slow down and I don't watch TV next to it. So lymph nodes, and then bone, you see the bone, that looks pretty cool, the supporting one. That's the bone and that's the cartilage. We'll talk a little more about those two. And then blood, we all know about blood. So when you look at the cartilage, the skeleton is quite, to me, is quite logical. You got bone, bricks on bricks, that wouldn't work. They're going to grind down. So you got to get a material that's not going to do that. Tupperware. But they didn't have Tupperware back then. So we had to make cartilage. But it's kind of like that, the softer topper. The harder topper is really the meniscus. That's pretty hard topper structure. So fibrocartilage is very similar to that when you touch it. And so the ends of bones are helpful. And then like flexibility, we need flexible ribs here. When we breathe, it needs a little flexibility. So that helps too with the cartilage. Or the nose, you bang into something, it's like if it's just bone and it might be a weapon, but it would still hurt if it's too bone. But then we also have the air pipe. And when you think about the food goes down here, and then we also breathe, and the lungs are here, so it's got to go down here somewhere. And so we got a food pipe and a wind pipe right behind each other. The wind pipe is, if you see the Adam's apple, that's the wind pipe. The food pipe is behind it. And so the wind pipe, but when you have air, if you blow air into a balloon to blow it up, it's not that easy to just open up that channel. And so when you think we would have to breathe in and inhale, and this is a collapsed tube, but every time you take a breath, it has to open and then it closes again. And it's much more forceful, it's much more laborious what you need to do. So what the body did, it says, well, we got to keep it open. And so it made cartilage rings because they're kind of firm structures and they keep it open. And it's like, I don't know, when you do on the dryer, sometimes they have the wind tubes that go to the outside and has wires in it. It's kind of like that a little bit. It keeps it open, it doesn't collapse. And it's actually, what's interesting is it's not all the way around, it's only in the front, and then in the back it's open, so when we eat, the food pipe can push into it a little bit and expand, because food, that's strong enough to, or liquid, that's strong enough to push a pipe open, especially if it goes against gravity. So that's why we need cartilage in the airways, to keep the pipe, to keep the wind pipe open. All that for that. Oh, look, here's the wind pipe. Oh. See, that's the ring, and then in the back it's open, but you can't really see that. We'll see that another time. We'll get to that chapter anyway. If you think of a knee cartilage at the ends, the bones get compressed and squeezed every time to take a step. Ha! That's how cartilage lives. Cartilage is avascular. Well, let me talk about more here, because otherwise I'm going to answer my own question. There's no way blood vessels can survive, so there aren't any. So if you have a squeezing event, if you have blood vessel in there and you have a situation where you have to be able to put pressure, the blood vessels are too delicate, they're going to break. And so every time you take a step, your cartilage will bleed. And so that doesn't work, so we don't have vascularity in those tissues. Cartilage is avascular. Since blood brings nutrients to the cells of a tissue, how can we assure that cartilage gets fed? Which one? Diffusion. But you need to squeeze the cartilage to get diffusion. And watching people jump off of buildings on TV doesn't squeeze our own cartilage. It doesn't matter which Mission Impossible it is. But that's one reason why moderate exercise is very important. What they call it, weight-bearing exercise is important because of those things. Because, yeah, if you jump up from buildings and you hurt your cartilage, of course it's going to get damaged, and then you're going to get osteo blah, blah, blah around it. But moderately doing that, like walking in the forest, would be most moderate. Not on concrete. That's actually already hard for our thing. But that helps the cartilage regenerate and keep it healthy. So that's why I bring that in. My anti-couch potato mission. Yeah, this is just for you to kind of get visual of what's where. And then this here talks about the avascularity, so we have that discussed. So let's see where we go. Cartilage comes in 3 different types, with each having unique qualities that make it suited for different tasks. Which type covers joint surfaces? Hyaline? Elastic? Bony? Which one? Hyaline. The other ones is elastic, that's you think of your ear. You can bend it, come back to original shape, even though your grandma told you not to do that. And then fibrocartilage, and you think of meniscus in the knee or discs in the back for that. Those are the 2 main examples for that. Now you get the bones. They're so cool. I like bones, as you can probably tell. They hold us up, protect delicate organs, and give muscles sticks to attach to and pull on so that we move. What two other unrelated functions can make us grateful to have bones? Make blood cells and calcium. Yeah. Well, the reason why I like my bones so much is because I was 17 and my big toe was numb for 2 years. And I was not liking that, and they called that sciatica. And so I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, and also in Switzerland is mandatory military, so when you have a back pain, you also want to not go to the military. And so the doctor said, you have morbus Bechterew disease. You're going to be in a wheelchair at 35. I'm like, what the heck is that all about? Because my back hurt. Of course, so I was on a search to figure out what's going on with that, because I'm not going to go in a wheelchair. And I didn't really trust that guy, because he says you shouldn't do anything that's like, I said, what do you want to, he says, what do you want to do when you grow up? I said, massage therapist. She said, oh, that's not a good idea. I said, He said, you should be in a desk job, because your back needs to be, that's old school thinking, you know, is wrong, right? Sitting is the worst for your back. And then the therapist come in, do some stem on me, and she's like, oh, don't trust him. I said, oh, good. So I didn't really trust him, but I had to. So that's why I was interested, because who's going to help my back? If the doctor's not going to give me an answer that I feel like is appropriate, the therapist says he doesn't really, in some ways, know what he's talking about. Who am I going to trust? And so the search began. That's why I like bones. So it's all self-serving. I'm still trying to get help. Compared to cartilage, bone has excellent blood supply, which makes it heal quite well. What other features help the healing process? Huh? Periosteum and endosteum. No, I think it's the periosteum honestly here, right? Let's go through there. I'll go look that up. Ta-da! Yeah, periosteum is the big one. So the periosteum is a stocking around, it's a skin around the bone, which brings blood vessels in and all that stuff. Bone's not going to collapse, so the blood is fine in there. If you break a blood vessel when a bone breaks, well, the bone's not supposed to break, so that's an extraordinary event. So often, it's more helpful to break a bone than break a ligament, because the bone will regrow faster than the ligament will ever heal. Especially if you look at really bad ankle sprains, some of that stuff, they don't heal. There's always a problem. And so you always have to work with it. That's why if you ever had an ankle sprain, you want to work with barefoot stuff, with balancey stuff, to make sure you have the agility in that foot that is better, because you have less protection from things you're not paying attention to. So that's the way I look at these things a little bit. But anyway, bone can heal very well. Bone seems like that material because we know it from dried out skeletons. And sometimes, look, they're even plasticky. They are actually constantly changing organs. For example, a hip bone becomes stronger the more we train it. That is, the bone physically changes its composition to withstand a greater force. Collagen fibers are laid down along stress line, and calcium salts are deposited. On the other hand, when our blood needs more calcium ions, bone becomes an incredible reservoir to pull from it. All that building up and breaking down work is done by 3 main cell types. List them. What are they? So you look at which prefix you look. You look at chondro or osteo. It's the osteo. Chondro is cartilage. Osteo. So you can knock these out right there, right? So you have clasped sides, blasts, and clones. But I guess clones are not in, right? So those are the ones. But make sure you analyze these things, and like if you see a word chondro, you ask, what does that mean? Or what does that belong to? It doesn't mean what does that mean. What does it belong to? It's an easier category. And that's cartilage. Osteo is bone. And then what else did we talk about up here? Dried up skeleton, trained. So this is interesting here. Let's go to that puppy. These are the cell types. So you have the cells, and then again, connective tissue has extracellular matrix, and here's the collagen fibers and the calcium, the inorganic salts. And here are the collagen fibers, the way they're spirally laid down around bone. And there's layers of, it's like the rungs in a tree. If you cut a tree, you see these rings. Each ring is a year, right? Because you see the seasons in it. And it's kind of looking similar, the way this is arranged. But this is really cool because when you see, these rings are arranged around these small osteons, these small little columns that make up the bones. And if we stress, this is a femur, this is a hip bone right here. And it sits right here in the pelvis. And if you're running and walking, the lines here get more enforced and get stronger. Well, this is also most frequently broken bone in osteoporosis. I think so, at least. That's why one of the reasons why I bring it up. But if we don't do things, they go away because the body tries to be very efficient with its energy use. And so then we start moving again. That's why it's a little bit of training before we get stronger. It's down in the bone. But also, the other thing with this bone, and that's why weight-bearing exercise is very important, this is where the femur comes in and then goes into the hip. And if you step off a curve, the force goes this way. And often here, when it's not strong, this can break. And so when you have a step coming down a little hard and you have osteoporosis, that can be too much depending on how bad your brittle disease is. And so weight-bearing exercise through life is helpful to keep that strong. And then the green leafy vegetables. If you want to know a good kale recipe, I found one. That kind of stuff. All right, so that's what I wanted to mention there. Let's go back to the text. Consider your own bones. They come in different shapes. The leg and arm and also the finger and toe bones are longer than wide, so they call them long bones. Others are more cube-shaped, flat, or have things sticking out. List the different shape classifications. What did I try to do with that? Oh, this is supposed to be a concept question. Oh, never mind. So that was not necessary. Like here, long bones have to heavily grow in length as we grow. They do that towards both ends of the bone. That growth area separates long bones into three main sections. Can you list them? 2 words. Which one? Oh, well, just do the best you can. The diaphysis and the epiphysis. Good. I know, these are weird words. Epi means on top. Epidermis is the top layer of the skin. It's above the dermis. So epi means on top of something. And so the epiphysis is on top of the diaphysis. Diaphysis is the centerpiece. Then they also actually have a metaphysis, the middle part. But what's most important when we talk about bone in here, functionally speaking, is the epiphyseal plate. It's this area where the bone is the longest cartilage. And as we grow, we don't want to break this because that's where the bone goes in length. And that can create a situation. If a kid breaks a femur on one side, not the other, it's going to grow unevenly. And so that's where that becomes a challenge. And so that's the main reason for us, I think, functionally, why I want you to know those. All right. There we go. When we see a bone from the outside, its surface is smooth. One type of bone material is compactly built, hard and very strong. It also makes it very heavy. Therefore, on the inside, we find a softer, lighter bone built of pillars that arrange along stress lines and forces. What is that type called? Spongy bone. What's another word for it? Trabecular bone. You know, I should have said choose all that apply. It might be that if you don't get this right, it might be both are wrong. And I didn't say choose all that apply, so double check on that. What number is that?
The first time I did spongy, and the second time I did bone.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, but it was only 2 answers you got, right?
Yeah, it's only those. Layered is not, lamellar is the other one. So that's the only 2 types. But I didn't say spongy and I didn't say choose 2. But when it's like this, you know it's all that apply. When it's round, it's just the one multiple choice.
Some of them didn't say that, and it was multiple choice.
You mean more than one answer? Yeah, I know. I have to. 19 didn't say that, and probably 20. If you catch them, text me.
Okay.
so I can shift them in the back, because it's a 450 damn questions, man. It's a lot of work for the whole course. So every time I need to do one process, it's like going through a lot of different things. So I need all the help I can get with supporting
So
me.
wait, number 19 was how many?
Number 19 is 2.
2, okay.
So the osteon is a bone subunit, which means, when we say subunit, which means we can study how bone works in that unit. So that's why we do that. So what we have here is the round, spirally arranged collagen fibers with inorganic salts in between them. We already talked about that. And the cool thing about that is salts, they're like bricks. But if you want to bend the brick, it breaks. You can't bend the brick without breaking. You probably can't bend it anyway, but it will break. If we have, so that's the bricky stuff. That's the salt, the calcium. But then the collagen fibers, they have a little give, not much, but if they're arranged spirally like this, we can bend a little this way, a little this way, a little this way. And so you think you have those around all of these things, and then with these osteons you make the bones, you have a little bit of a give. When we walk and move, it bends a little bit. We don't want too much, but we don't want too little either. We want it to be a little bit flexible. So that's the osteon. The osteocytes live in lacunae. The chondrocytes also live in lacunae. If they can't move around, if they're stuck in a house, you've got to give them a house to move around it. Otherwise, they're going to die out. And so that's the same for cells. We're just many cells. You think of cells, they're like us. They're just not 75 trillion of them. But if you think what they need, it's kind of, that thinking. So, and they need to have, they're social beings like us. So they need to connect to one another. So we got Volkmann's canals run from layer to layer to the different lacunae so they can talk to each other. And then, the divergent canal is the one that goes up and down in the center of each osteon carrying blood supply. I don't think it carries a nerve, but definitely an artery and a vein. So we can get food to those cells. They need to eat. Don't starve them. Another thing, next time, you're really lethargic, don't want to get out because it's another Netflix. I'm watching this show now. Never mind. These shows, man, the binge watching is horrible with this Netflix stuff. But you're like, I should really take a walk. Just think of your cartilage cells that are suffocating because they don't have any nutrients getting to them because we don't squeeze the cartilage together. Maybe you'll have some compassion for it. And then we'll get up and move around a bit. All right, here, I talk about the osteon. Okay, let's see. They're tiny round pillars built with ends compression so that the organism can raise itself up against gravity. Sort of small, tiny little 4x4 beams stemming up the roof of a house. A channel going up and down inside that carries nutrient vessel. It's surrounded by sheets of collagen fiber with calcium salts deposited between them. Osteocytes are the keepers, maintain these structures. What are the little houses called? Good, lacunae. You remember that now? It's come twice. It's on the test. I know the question. I remember it. Star it. Bone is created in two main ways. Flat bones start out of two membranes. You think of the skull as a flat bone. All right, flat bone. Bone sprouts, so to speak, fill in spaces in between them. Most other bones start as a cartilage model and then is replaced by bone. What is that type called? Endochondral. Endo means inside, chondro means cartilage. It starts inside the cartilage. Intramembranous starts in between two membranes. Intra is in between. So in a baby's bone, you still have a soft spot. It's just not that soft. Right here. If you go up the ears, in the center, there's the spot. And it's still a little givey. But in a baby, you can push, it's very soft. And you really feel there's just two membranes. There's no bone in there yet. So that's where you visualize that. And I think the picture is actually pretty good that I found for that. Oh, this picture is pretty good too. You got the sesamoid bone reason. No, we'll get back to that in a minute. But see here, this is the plates and then the membrane where it's only membrane. It's a little dark, but you can visualize it. Did you understand the reason for sesamoid bone in the video? Did you watch the video? Oh, good. I did too this morning, trying to think if it's still if I need to redo it. But if you think of a sesamoid bone, they are not long bones or flat bones or irregular bones. They are kind of like dead material in tendons. It's calcifications in tendons. They're not really bone that way. They're not alive that way. But they are inside tendon to help the smooth motion of a joint. So in the kneecap, you can understand that when you think the knee bends, right? And you got the quads up here, they go up, down, forward from the femur down, and anchor into the front of the knee. And if you have a right angle right here, and you want to bend that knee, you want to straighten that leg out, you have to exude a lot of force to overcome that initial pull. That's really strong if it's a right angle. And so you contract the quad, contract, and all of a sudden it overcomes force and it kicks up. Because the more close you get to the top, the easier it gets. So the more force will make a faster movement. In order to not have that be a problem, to make it be able to have a smooth motion with increased contraction of that muscle, we put in a patella to round the pathway of the muscle going down into the leg. So now it's not a right angle, now it's a rounding, and I contract this a little bit and it pulls gradually and doesn't have to overcome that initial strong force. So that's in patella. Then we got, there's, sesamoid bones. Look at all these. 0.9% of the population has one here. If you were that person, you got one here. Everybody's got some here to balance out the thumb movement a little bit. And then we got down in here as well. So those are the sesamoid bones. A special type of short bone that forms in a tendon to assist smooth joint movement.